Ever wonder how researchers get people to be honest, especially about sensitive
Oh,
topics?
yeah, it's a tricky one.
It is. So today, we're diving into a method that's as clever as it is controversial. The bogus pipeline.
It is a fascinating approach.
It really is. It's like something straight out of a spy movie, honestly.
I can see that. Like, how do you get someone to reveal their true feelings when those feelings might not be, well, socially acceptable?
Exactly. And that's where the bogus pipeline comes in. It's all about trying to sidestep something called social desirability bias. That tendency we have to present ourselves in the best possible light.
Right. Like, who wants to admit to, say, not always recycling when everyone else seems to be so
It's
eco-conscious?
like you don't want to be judged, right?
Exactly. And that can really skew research findings, especially when you're dealing with those sensitive topics.
Totally. So with the bogus pipeline, researchers essentially convince participants that they're hooked up to a lie detector, a super accurate, can't fool it lie detector. The catch, it's totally fake.
A clever trick. But is it ethical?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's exactly what a 2001 study by Guinness and Hemmel, published in the Journal of Applied Social Psychology, tried to figure out.
A Guinness, like the beer.
Exactly. Though this study is less about enjoying a cold one and more about the ethics of, well, tricking people for science.
Sounds intriguing. How did they go about it?
Well, instead of actually putting people through the bogus pipeline themselves, they took a really interesting approach.
Oh,
They had potential participants read summaries of 6 different studies where this bogus pipeline had actually been used.
interesting. So they're looking at how people perceive the ethics, not the actual impact on participants.
Exactly. They wanted to get into the minds of the public, see how they felt about this method being used in various situations. And these studies covered a range of, let's just say, sensitive topics.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Oh, everything from racial attitudes to children's smoking habits, even attitudes towards disabled people.
Whoa, children's smoking habits. They use this technique on kids.
One of the example studies focused on that, yeah. But it's important to remember that Guinness and Hendel didn't conduct these studies themselves. They just used them as, like, case studies to gauge public opinion.
Gotcha. So what did they find? Were people, like, outraged by the deception?
You might be surprised. Overall, people actually viewed these bogus pipeline studies as pretty important. And get this, they believed the bogus pipeline itself to be effective, even when they knew there might be other ways to get that information.
Really? So even though they acknowledged the potential for, let's say, discomfort, they still saw the value in the research.
It almost seems like they felt the ends justified the means, wouldn't you say?
It does seem that way. Fascinating, isn't it? The human mind always weighing costs and benefits, even when it comes to ethics.
Speaking of which, the study found that participants felt the potential benefits to society, like getting a more accurate understanding of these sensitive topics, outweighed the potential costs to those individual participants.
I see. So a sort of utilitarian perspective, the
Yeah.
greater good and all that.
Exactly. But let's be real here. Wouldn't you be a little, well, furious if you found out a researcher had straight up lied to you, even if it was for a good cause?
Fury. Oh, absolutely. I think anyone would feel at least a little betrayed.
Right. It's like a violation of trust.
Exactly. And the study actually touched on that. It seems people felt that even if those participants could eventually, like, forgive the researcher,
Hmm.
they still might not be totally open about any negative feelings they had. It's like
Yeah.
there's this lingering sense of, hey, you lied to me.
Oh, for sure. Makes total sense to me. And I gotta say, I'd be hesitant to trust that researcher again. Once bitten, twice shy.
Yeah, I get that. That whole dynamic makes you think, doesn't it? About the balance between getting honest data and maintaining ethical boundaries.
Absolutely. And here's another thing that really struck me from the study. Knowing a study might involve, oh, I don't know, a lie detector,
Mm.
or even just the possibility of deception,
Mm.
made people less likely to participate.
It's like transparency is a double-edged sword.
Exactly. On the one hand, it's crucial for ethical research. But on the other, it could make it harder to get that truly accurate data, especially on touchy subjects.
It's the classic dilemma. How do we balance the need for ethical research with the pursuit of valuable knowledge?
It's like we want to protect people from harm, but we also want to understand human behavior, even the messy parts.
No easy answers there, I'm afraid. But that's what makes this whole discussion so important.
And speaking of messy,
The kids, right?
yeah, those findings about children really caught my eye too.
Me too. I mean, Using the bogus pipeline on kids, that's a whole other ethical can of worms, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The study found that while people saw the bogus pipeline as potentially more effective on kids,
Because kids might be more easily convinced by the fake lie detector.
exactly,
Yeah.
they also felt it caused kids more discomfort. Makes sense, right?
Totally. It's like their sense of trust and understanding of the world is still developing. It makes them more vulnerable. And that raises all sorts of questions about the ethics of doing any kind of research with children, especially when deception's involved.
It's like we need to be extra cautious, right?
Yeah.
Kids aren't just mini adults. They deserve special consideration.
Couldn't agree more. This whole bogus pipeline thing really gets you thinking, huh?
It does. It's not as simple as saying deception is always wrong in research.
Nope. A Guinness and Henle study showed us that public perception is far more nuanced than that.
Right. People get the ethical concerns, but they also see the potential for real-world benefits. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
No easy answers at all. So where do we go from here? Is the bogus pipeline a legitimate tool for research, or should we just leave it in the past?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is. Guinness and Henle gave us a lot of data to chew on, but they didn't really offer a definitive answer. It's more like they handed us a flashlight to explore this ethical maze, but left the actual pathfinding up to us.
Love that analogy. What I'm taking away from all this is we can't just rely on our gut reactions when it comes to research ethics. We got to really engage with the complexities of these issues.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think it's important to remember that the ethical landscape is always evolving. What might have been considered acceptable 20 years ago.
Might be seen totally differently today, right?
Exactly. So we got to be constantly reevaluating our ethical guidelines, keeping up with new technologies and societal
It's
changes.
an ongoing conversation.
It is, and a conversation worth having, even when it gets, a little uncomfortable.
For sure. Because ultimately, the pursuit of knowledge shouldn't come at the expense of our ethics.
Right. Couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners today. A Guinness and Henle's study gives us a framework for thinking about the ethics of the bogus pipeline, but the discussion doesn't stop there.
We got to keep asking those tough questions. Is there a line we should never cross, even in the name of science? What price are we willing to pay for knowledge?
Those are questions we should all be grappling with, not just researchers. After all, we're all participants in this grand experiment called life.
Ooh, I like that.
Glad you do.
So on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the ethics of the bogus pipeline. Huge thanks to you for guiding us through this complex topic.
Happy to be here. Always enjoy exploring these fascinating ethical dilemmas.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to the study and some additional resources. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. It feels like, honestly, we've just scratched the surface of this whole bogus pipeline thing.
Right. There's so much more to think about when it comes to deception and research. Like, where do we draw the line? Are there types of deception that are just like off limits no matter what?
It's a tough question. And with all these new technologies emerging, AI, virtual reality, you name it, the potential for both like groundbreaking research and potentially harmful research is only growing.
Absolutely. Those traditional models of informed consent, they might not be enough anymore.
Right. It's like we need a whole new ethical playbook for the 21st century. One that takes into account data privacy, the long-term psychological impacts, even those unintended consequences of research.
It really is a lot to consider.
It is. But that's exactly why these deep dives are so important, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. They force us to confront these complex issues head on, start asking the right questions.
Exactly. And it's not always about finding the right answers because sometimes there just aren't any easy solutions.
Right. It's more about having those conversations, weighing different perspectives, ultimately making informed decisions that align with our values.
So to everyone listening out there, we challenge you. Keep this conversation going. Read the research, talk to your friends, and don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions.
Yes. The future of ethical research, it depends on all of us being engaged and informed.
Well said. Knowledge is power, but it's only truly valuable when we use it responsibly, right?
Couldn't agree more.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the bogus pipeline. Huge thanks to you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Always a pleasure. These ethical dilemmas, they never get old.
They really don't. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the study and other resources. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.